All right. I'm working on ideation and story creation in video games and storytelling and designing comics, and blocking in some of the things that I think, some of the things that I've learned, some of the steps and processes. How does a dream become reality? What's the momentum that creates the structure and the framework of these things? Why do we have comics? Why do we have games? What made games, what goes into it, and then that became our mythology of games in a sense. They were like active problem solving systems, right? Active puzzles using computers and technology. And like that's the first story of games, is it being some kind of an active puzzle solving challenge uh, system, right? And then there became like stories around these things, and those stories kind of became mythologies. And then there's like stories that reference the past, like as technology continued to advance, stories became like a remix of their predecessors, and remixes that bring in other things from the world, other things that are popular, other things that relate to those things. um, but then there exists this sense of continuity between the story of the games and the gameplay of the games, and how they reflect on each other. Like how the gameplay became the seeds of the stories of games, but then those stories also affect the gameplay, and this balance between the two. Some games use almost no sense of narrative continuity, like the gameplay exists in a completely parallel reality to anything having to do with the story. A lot of like realistic games, you run around and you restore your health just naturally. You're like Wolverine man plus the Terminator. You gun down like 500 dudes, the highest kill count in human history, and you're bulletproof, and you're like this superhuman dude. um and it's like this power fantasy kind of thing where it's just a game. You can murder people endlessly with no uh like empathic response, no human response, because you're a juggernaut. And then within the story of the game, it's completely different. It's like an active movie. It's like Tomb Raider, like Drake's Uncharted series and such, which are really, really great games. And the gameplay is on point in these active battle simulations, and the exploration and the way they overlay narrative on top and through that. Or like when you're done with an action sequence and then your characters are talking, it's like back to the world of the story. So they're kind of tied together, but in a way that doesn't really even try to make sense. Because their predecessors are like, you're going through, you're fighting things. If you take enough damage, you're out. So you're like dodging hits and such, and you're creating this active battle framework. And then it's like, how do you make it realistic moment to moment and get into it? This is good. This is like bulk content. I'm probably not going to use this in the finished thing. But then there's other games that use the ideas of the gameplay to like reference the ideas of the story. Things like Metal Gear Solid is a good example, or like even like Legend of Zelda was like the mythology based around a simple concept of like a hero and an end villain and a goal and this like world, and you explore through it, and you're like a transformative force, and you take on all of these challenges and trials that are going to be like in this sequence where you gain abilities and powers till eventually you're the hero of the land. As like the meta mythology behind Zelda and a lot of other games. um, but then they also let these worlds exist in their own space and use them as a way to tell lots of little character stories, and to bring the interaction of the player into the world as you're taking on the gauntlet of challenges that is the game. To make really magical moments, really magical scenarios, stories that have never been seen before in exactly the same way. Places to try new things, fun spaces to exist. And it's always fun to take on a challenge, by yourself or with your friends, and to apply yourself to it, to figure out puzzles. There's this satisfying thing. Um, so the interactivity of the player as an element in both the active element in the gameplay, but also as a participant in the story of the games. And there's so much that you could get into here. I'm trying to make a general framework, and then you could give specific examples of all different types of games. I like a little bit of continuity between like the pieces of the gameplay and then the pieces of the story that like reference the gameplay in some way, like trying to make sense of the gameplay. And it doesn't have to be a one-to-one comparison. They can exist in different dimensions, but they should at least have like a few parallels. Like Metal Gear Solid is an example where they're like creating a bunch of awesome spy movie stuff and all of these like um, they described it like hide and seek, but these stealth action scenarios where you're this like spy and you venture through this complex and there's a boss at the end of it, So it's a kind of basic action movie scenario mapped to the framework of the game. And like the end guy's name is Big Boss, because he's a big boss at the end of the game. But then later on, he becomes part of the mythology of the game series. It's just like his title. So there's like the way that things were created to fit onto a game and into a game to facilitate the game process. But then they evolve in their own way over time. And there's a lot of people that do innovative things with this. Um, Really, really fun. Yeah, Javier Kojima's and such. Um, and then, yeah, gosh, there's a lot we could get into, like the spaces that games create, and it's like creating a sense of familiarity and nostalgia with these spaces. Games like the Final Fantasy series is really cool. Again, like a series of heroes will like venture across this land, gaining abilities and powers and fighting like monsters and challenges that have bosses in between. And there's places that you go to explore a number of places that have like items and monsters in them. There's a sense of RPG progression that keeps you actively involved in the game, in the like moments of how do you beat this monster, how do you beat that monster. You get more powerful consistently over time, so you get into the sense of progression. But then once you have that space, like who are these characters, how can you make them interesting and dynamic, and then it evolved in really, really cool ways to create stories that you just haven't seen anywhere. um, like Final Fantasy, like the later Final Fantasy games especially, but Final Fantasy just as a whole, with their warriors of light that will, be a force of good in this world and like take on these challenges and become the heroes of legend eventually. So you have like a world and a series of characters, and they're like bond, and they're a team, and they take things on. Um, and I'd like to do a whole extended analytical breakdown type thing. I've been thinking of like blocking in study sessions so I could learn like where RPGs came from, the first examples of RPGs and like tabletop and such, how those RPG elements started being integrated into games, the first JRPGs like Dragon Quest, how Final Fantasy remixed the Dragon Quest concept in the most dynamic and interesting ways, and then became like a household name where they were like the biggest and the best, and the progression of these different series. Yeah, stuff like Pokemon, Shin Megami Tensei, Persona series. Like, what are the motivations behind game design? How they create like interest and value for the player, um, and then how those things create stories and mythologies, and how those stories and mythologies can then take on a life of their own, and like breathe within these spaces and like touch other things, where they're not entirely motivated by just the whatever's going to make the game popular and valuable, but they are reflective of it usually. um, there's some things that we should never touch, like me knowing anything more about your favorite games than you do, or having any kind of thing like that. So I should ground things in like my thoughts on this, other people's thoughts on this, how it could be. Keep a grain of salt in everything. Super good. And if I make videos like these and just outlining my thoughts, I've done this a couple times where I've done that, and then the next few videos I make, without even thinking about it, I'll answer most of the questions that I put out, because I've created like a whatever, like a stake of memory in this space where it's like, yeah, that's something to work on, think about it for a little bit, and come back and then give the presentation I'm trying to give now. Yeah. So the first step should probably just be to open this stuff up. I was like, we're going to talk about narrative in games and how the gameplay creates the story, and the story reflects on the gameplay. Because like, what is it? You know, is it a character in this space taking on these challenges? You controlling this hero character? You role playing as a hero character? Are they motivated by like their character goals? Or are they motivated by your goals as a player to like get more powerful and clear these challenges and capture awesome moments or whatever your own motivations are? I love capturing awesome moments in games. Something someone might have missed, something like fun and just like, I don't know, whimsical or lighthearted, or just like a space to relax and chill within the space of the game. Putting together all of the art and animations in the coolest sequence to give a demonstration of everything that you can do in a game, where you don't spend too much time on any one thing, and mix all of the different things you can do into the game into a really nice sequence so that it's like as fun and entertaining as possible, and just gives a good demonstration of the game and the game design. I love doing that. I'll do that when I'm by myself. You know, not always, but like in a Final Fantasy game like Final Fantasy VIII, you can just like use one of the very most powerful abilities that you have and just use only that, and you can take things out in the most time-effective way possible. But it's not quite as fun as, you know, playing cards, talking to people, doing some attacks, some magic attacks, you know, like just seeing all the different animations and the interaction of all of the characters so that something different is happening as much as possible while you're making really good progress and doing effective moves. The game looks coolest in that way. You know, I had friends who weren't even ever into Final Fantasy who came over, and I was playing Final Fantasy VIII, and they were like, this shit looks cool as fuck when you play it. I was like, you make this shit into like a cartoon, they said. It's pretty good. But I was trying to like, you know, use all the different things to create dramatic and dynamic moments in the combat that creates a good sense of progression and all the things that you can do. But of course, as a player, you just want to do whatever's fun, but it's usually fun to mix things up. And if there's lots of different things you can do, playing Ghost of Tsushima, to do some story stuff, some side stuff, some exploration, and to do a little bit of everything, but then to also just find it as you're going through, where it has a very nice, just like you'll find cool stuff consistently and find cool stuff to do in their progression. And then doing little character stories in Japan, they could have done more of that. Their character stories are always fun, but they had a way to make infinite Akira Kurosawa characters and moments and stories. And a lot of it's not that interesting. It is more like pop entertainment value type stuff that only sometimes like breathes into its own thing, where you're like, this character and their motivations and their stories and fucking crazy, and it's really cool. It adds to the flavor of Ghost of Tsushima and transporting you not just back into a historical Japan, but into this kind of mythic samurai movie space that's always a little bit larger than life, which is cool. Because again, obviously, like Ghost of Tsushima, by the end, you know, Musashi Miyamoto, you know, historical Musashi Miyamoto, had the most like confirmed victories of duels in Japanese history, and it was like 60 or something. It was like, god damn, it might not be that high. Let me see. I know there's like historical legends of like one samurai beating 100 people on one bridge and holding a bridge. I don't know if it's real though. Duels. I don't know how mythological Musashi Miyamoto has become. Undefeated record in his 62 duels. Chikata! Next is 33 by Itosai. So, huge margin. Absolutely huge margin of victory. But as things go on and someone becomes a fictional character, once no one has met them and they become reflected in other people's thoughts about them and the reverence that they hold, then there was the real person and the things that they did, but they get lost in history pretty quick. Other things have amazing historical value. It's hard to say it's one side or the other when you're looking at history, because the like tenacity of scribes and whatnot, who were like the legacy of the things that would be remembered and passed on. Obviously, there's a little bit of bias there, but I don't know. Sometimes like it's really surprisingly good. Other times it's like there was so much that would be lost in that space and retranslated over and over that like what amount of the original content are you actually getting? Especially like you imagine things from like like using modern language and metaphors, like if that kind of happened today with how people act. That's how all dramas and recreations are made, to translate these stories to the modern mind. But it's like, how much the modern mind? Obviously some things are going to be the same in human spirit, right? Like some things are going to be universal, but the way language has changed and the way people have grown, culture has grown since then. Like, is it still the same story at all? Or has it become something different? But humans do have like a vast, deep potential for imagination that I feel like can really be used in a way to extract an even higher amount of truth from like historical facts. You lend your imagination to it and bring it back to life and like discover the emotions and put yourself into the shoes of the past. Like even if it's not the same, it's still like a life-giving thing. All right. Yeah, it's a life-giving thing that is reflective to the past and to the self. I feel like it could be used as something to help you learn and contextualize like the past history is reflective of the world and like patterns in the world. You probably don't want to hear all this. This is like expanding into another thing that I'd like to do, which is where like I want to create a free form study session space with like I want to make more content geared towards arts, story creation, design, how design and story go together to create interesting fusions and combinations. You have a really interesting idea for a story, a really interesting design, and then they start reflecting on each other as you're moving forward, and they elevate each other and become something unique and magical that creates the world of a comic or a game, and also creates something of entertainment value and commercial value, which is just great for artists. But then to have a series that also encourages artists to explore their own ideas. And if you can do something of good entertainment value, right, and you're making money from your art, then you can also explore ideas that are interesting to you and ideas of artistic integrity, and to try and get that in there. Like if comics and games creates a window for you to make money with your craft, then in the spaces that creates, you can do interesting things. And I really love artists that have done this. Like Metal Gear Solid fucking won with the game, and it won with the game consistently every single time. They could have had anything in the story and it still would have been a successful game series. Granted, their designs and the moments they capture are really awesome, but the whole like philosophical narrative and the exploration into all these things that were interesting for Hideo Kojima, like players weren't asking for this, but it was something that he put in for himself as a storyteller. And also, it's not like he's just writing it to himself. He's writing it within an entertainment framework in the story and mythology of the games, and like putting it in the shoes of the player. Like it's something that is written for you, but it's not like what players were asking for was also to get like a philosophical treatise at the same time. But it was something where it's like exploring awesome philosophical ideas in films and stuff. There's films that had touched his heart, and existing in the same space as his masters and heroes, and kind of following in their footsteps and doing something that was meaningful to him, to the player, created meaning and value in a lot of unexpected ways, and gives Metal Gear a artistic integrity Rarely seen in games. Very rarely. Especially in mainstream games. Because there's often like a division if something's going to be an art narrative game or a money making AAA game. In some places where these worlds touch, where you want something new and innovative and fresh, but you also want something like of truth and something of integrity in there, even when you're doing high drama, high tension, an emotional roller coaster. There's sense of development and exploration as you're just like first seeing a space for the first time, and you're in the middle of it. You're familiar with things, but then by the end, you've gained a sense of mastery over this whole world that you have enjoyed and fought through and transformed. Where at first you're just starting out and you're level 1, and by the end you're like level 100, you're the master of the game. The process of the way that you relate to games as a player throughout the whole gameplay experience. It's something that's going to be a part of your life for several months, and you pick it back up and pick it back up. You engage the world of these games in all these different ways, and they're fun. It's always fun to explore a new game, especially if that game's good. Like anyone that's interested at all in these things, just like pick up The Witcher 3. Yeah, The Witcher 3 is super good. The narrative and the gameplay running beautiful parallel lines between like the exploration and like taking on challenges and the sense of progression. But then you are this guy, and he actually is a guy who could like take on hundreds of dudes and monsters. Like if he just takes down 10 guys all by himself, it's like, yo, Geralt could do that. How he acts doesn't break character from the main character badass of the story. You know, he's not like, oh, I'm just another soldier who happens to be the only force of progression and destruction in the entire world of this game. It's like, obviously you're not just a dude if you go back to having superpowers every time you reach a new place. And it's a little bit goofy, but it also makes sense in the way that it's the spiritual successor to all of these different games and types of games that we've become familiar with over time. It's the successor to all of these stories that we've become familiar with over time as well, and it's a fusion point that mixes those. Like now it's a part of a TV show. It's like a drama TV show or a movie about these dudes in this situation where Laura Croft falls down and like stabs herself with a piece of rebar, and she's like, oh my god, and you gotta crawl really slowly over to his face and like treat the wound, and she's there like all night. And then she's going back to like taking bullets to the face and like getting mauled by dogs and just being a total beast. So you have that experience of like just fighting these awesome active battle situations. You're doing like parkour and like the movement is really fucking crispy. The AI is pretty good. But it makes no sense in terms of the story that they set up. There's other games like Metal Gear that kind of pokes fun at it. Like other times they'll give you like explanations of how to do the controls of the game, but in character as this dude who's like this colonel that's like breaking down all of the setup of this like the whole mission of the game. Like, what are you doing in this place? What do you have to look out for? There's things that you don't know. There's things that you do know. They set it up as like an active like mystery action movie where there's a number of unreliable narrators. There's a number of stuff that and you're not given everything right out the jump. Like films that have done this, bringing film concepts into games, but fusing them to the narrative and the mythology of the game. You're like, there's going to be a series of bosses. There's going to be a series of tools that you get. Each one expands the gameplay mechanics, which are already really, really solid. There's like a basic challenges, but then they remix them in new ways as you move through the game. There's not a point when it's not engaging and captivating as a gamer, and that keeps you invested in the story that you didn't necessarily ask for, but makes the game more cool and memorable, unique and awesome. I love that though. They'll talk about game stuff with a sense of humor and sometimes like a fourth wall breaking. Like that's the story of the game and this is the gameplay of the game. But then, there's a lightheartedness about it. It's pretty good. Um, Even as a serious story, it never takes itself too seriously at any point. And you're there for the challenges. You're there for the progression. To stand there looking at the sunset at the very end and be like, yo, fought your way through that place. And as the main character's like, oh, god damn, he fought his way through that place. You get that shared empathic sense of having overcome all of these challenges. Perhaps you get a sense of determination that stays with you. That even if something's difficult at first, you can apply yourself to it. You can learn these things and take on any challenge. And even if something isn't like they explain exactly how to do it, you can figure shit out on your own. So you get a determination for not giving up, a determination for figuring shit out, staying with problems longer than some people might, and having been given all these examples within the game of that happening, where you're like, first that seems really difficult, but you know that it's not. You know there is a solution and a strategy, and even if it takes you a whole bunch of time, so figure it out and crack it. But yeah. You can do that in life for everything. It seems difficult at first. You don't get it. And you're starting at level 1 or level 0, and building your way up. You can gain a level of mastery in anything. Where you're at right now isn't reflective of you or what you'll become. It's reflective of where you're at right now. Moving from that place, taking step by step by step, you gain a mastery over almost anything. So that's cool. Yeah, something like that and how that's reflected in games, like the experience of the player and what makes games motivating and valuable, like created the market of games. That's why we have the industry, that's why we have the stories, and then stuff like Zelda and Mario that actually created like a game world with just a little bit of narrative. I like Mario because it's all active narrative. It's narrative through design. You have like a main character, you have a series of challenges, yeah, and puzzles. Like they don't tell you anything in Mario. Yeah, Mario expanded the bands on what was possible more than almost any game. Kojima's like Mario, main influence in Metal Gear. But the way it wasn't like a super clearly defined challenge. It's like dodge that guy and shoot them, some Space Invaders type stuff. It was like you move right, but how you move right, how you avoid and move through these environments, you can start to see the ghosts of hundreds of Marios all taking different routes and trying things, and there's hidden items and blocks and things all over. You think like things might not be as they appear, and the imagination of the player was maybe for the first time an active participant in game design. You take that into like Zelda, Metal Gear, and how we created all these different genres of games. Each genre of game is a series of like things that will release your serotonin as a gamer. There's things to challenge and try, some kind of active puzzle elements. The shape these puzzles take can be completely different. But there's just like a reflex thing and timing. Reflex and timing are usually like part of most games. You're like, okay, you do the thing, but then you have to imagine into the future and having that future vision in games. So you see 5 different things moving in different ways. Where are they going to be in 3 seconds when you make your run and jump through? And if you can do that, you can get really good at most types of games where you can predict the future really reliably and move yourself consistently to a place of the greatest strategic advantage. Because you know it's going to happen while being ready for like other wrenches to be thrown in there. Super fun, super good to be like, to pull off a really nice video game trick in games. It just feels good, You're like, especially if it's something that was challenging and then was tricky, and then you gained a mastery over it. You come back and you're the master of that part of the game, and you move through it. It's really good. It keeps me motivated for all kinds of things: art, storytelling, and design. You learn new skills consistently and always have like a beginner's mindset. If you like leveled up at one specific thing like pretty far, and to go back to the ground level with a different thing would be quite difficult because you get to keep your mastery in the thing that you're already good at. You know, it's really tempting to just stay there. But if you can add more things to it, to expand to that mastery, and always to be able to like take on that beginner's mindset is super healthy for like personal growth and development, and even to continue building your mastery, whatever you're into. Like if there's a bunch of things you already know how to draw, you can just stick to them. But if you start taking on lots of things you don't know how to draw, which is something I've been doing recently, then you can expand that and add to that world that you can create and that process of drawing that you so enjoy. Like drawing beautiful girls, you could also draw waterfalls and fields and trees and I don't know, just like nice backdrops, really nice backdrops. And there's a couple of things you could do that. And then it's not just like pretty girls standing around in space. It's like a character that's part of the scene in a world that becomes a moment in time. And this is totally, from experience. Where, just to capture a really cool character design was most of like what I wanted to do with arts. And then I could like imagine a whole story. It'd be like character, story, they enter through the space. But I could only see it in my mind, to like, take that dream and define it and put in work and research to be like, okay, it's a magical forest. What does it look like? How do you explore and design those things until like a place where a scene happens or something really, really cool. It becomes memorable. And something that also takes the the investment of you're making like a story for an audience, the investment of your audience or your participants. Like if they invested themselves in the world of the story, and then you're doing cool things with it, giving them like really awesome looking temples and trees and stuff. If you built this place up, it's like a very magical place, and then you take what you've already know and established and like move it into new places. And it's a good fusion of energy. Yeah, no, it's good to be able to learn new things. Be okay with being a beginner and not to get invested in your like the idea of any kind of mastery. Josh Waitzkin, my boy, oh man, he gave me so many things. He gave me so many things in his book. I'm grateful. And Josh Waitzkin for you might not be who Josh Waitzkin was for me, but someone out there is that person for you. And I encourage you finding them, someone that will help you to learn and to be your best self and think about whatever it is that you want to achieve in life in an effective way, a good mental mindset, and to, like instead of just going on autopilot, to get into your mental and to use it in the best way possible to achieve whatever you want to achieve. Like you have so much power of mind and thought. There's just so much going on most of the time that it's hard to break it down into pieces and analyze them, use them to your advantage somewhere. Okay. I'm going outside and smoke a cigarette. And work on some design things, but then also thinking about this series and what would be fun little examples that doesn't take 30 minutes to say, but also concisely outlines the whole spectrum of what we're talking about. Like the storyline in Mario and Zelda and how that created the worlds of the games and that how they changed over time. And it just goes into everything about game design. If you're looking at like how Nintendo developed as a company, how technology developed around Nintendo, how Nintendo innovated on this technology. What were their sales tactics? What were their brand image? These things that Nintendo is trying to do is reflected within the world of the games. They're trying to, we have to do new things, or like, this is a new system. We need something that makes everything that we're already good at and that people know us for. Give an example of that, but to take it to the next level and add in new things, because what is new is super valuable in games. But it's also got to be good. It's got to be like all these things. And then there's an exploratory space where designers, Shangzi will tell you all about it, but designers and writers and like concept designers have to like play and explore within these space where we're trying to hit all of those bullet points. These are confines of the project. You know, you're designing to spec, but then you still get to play and explore this space as a designer. But like Mario Sunshine could have hit everything they were trying to do. It wasn't the most successful game, so Galaxy or something. It could have been like 20 different compositions, but it had to hit all of those motivating points to be Nintendo's Wii game that is the successor of the Mario series. What can they do with physics? What can they do with graphics? What can they do with motion controls? What can they do with all these things? And then how they build a story in the world around that game concept. You know, which later becomes one of the most beautiful, one of the most nostalgic, one of the most instantly engaging, awesome games ever made. It becomes an experience for the player. So there's a lot that goes into it. There's ways to simplify these things, you know, where you're like, I don't know, those narrative games where it's not trash talking, but kind of just looking at how the gameplay and story of a lot of like realistic action games make no sense, but they're doing a bunch of entertainment things that are mapped out over the map of the game. They seem less fun when you're doing that. It's like, I like to use myself in the characters and moments of the story. And then also to get into the exploration and the game design, where there's satisfying game design things that's keeping the atmosphere of the story into these active puzzle segments, sense of progression and whatnot. So they are reflective, but they just like ignore the continuity completely between the two worlds. Where, like, yeah, in The Last of Us, like Ellie has killed more people and been shot more times than every soldier you will ever meet in your entire life. You're like, yeah, I guess Ellie's hard as fuck. But you know, she is your assistant and helps you sometimes while you're going on these active puzzle things. The game's gonna be pretty long. It only takes so long to fight and beat all of these guys. So you have to have like a shit ton of these combat scenarios. It'd be way more than anyone would ever fight. But I kind of like a thing, and we'll demonstrate where like maybe the world of the game exists in something that is like similar and reflective enough of our world to be like understandable. Like there's a military conflict, but then this world has crazy technology that give these people almost like superpowers. So you're using like a superhero type mythology, which like anyone who's a main character of a video game is going to be a superhero within that world. You know, they are the force of change and the whole axis that the entire game rotates around. And then you're like fighting these guys so you can like heal, and yet there is still like, you know, death and conflict and a sense of change. If you do something like that, it's quite cool. If you're like, this guy actually has to fight like 20 to 50 guys like every fucking sequence of the thing. And you have super elite tier like powers. Like if you could just go with like a superhero type mythology, look at some Avengers stuff, and like, oh, it fits nicely over the framework of a game. It can do really fantastic things, but then also have genuine character moments and like characters that are, it's crazy having to deal with this fucking game story that you go through. But they be strong and motivated and take it on. Really cool. Yeah, there's a lot of games that do this pretty well. Vanquish, it's an awesome game. Thinking of that, they're like, you have the most high tech valuable possible like battle armor and like training. You go in there, like take that on, you'll be the hero of this world. Yeah, no, there's lots of ways that you can do it. I remember playing Red Dead Redemption, and the guy, your main character, was always so unhappy to be there. He was like, "God damn, I don't want to do this quest. They forced his hand. The lives of his family is in danger. And these gangsters are like, you go to this West and work for us." He was constantly complaining, like, "Ah, I don't want to. I gave up the outlaw life." But my motivation as a player was the complete opposite of his. I was like, I want to go on Old West adventures and like shoot all these bad guys and like explore this place. You know? He's like, I have to play this game. God damn it. Which is a kind of a is a continuation of Grand Theft Auto 4, which I thought worked better in that framework. Like he's also an unmotivated main character who's trying to like he doesn't want to live a life of crime, but the life of crime finds him. It's his destiny. It's Nico Bellic, the main character of Grand Theft Auto 4. And then like, yeah, I want to do awesome crime adventures, and he's kind of like, I kind of have to do crime adventures, don't I? And he gets sucked into it. The narrative in Grand Theft Auto 4 was pretty good. They explored interesting things, the way they worked with an entertainment framework, and like reflected on crime movies and films. It wasn't quite as jarring, and I don't know why that is. Part of it's like the world not taking itself too seriously, and then things that you can do within that, like you can definitely role play to an element. I never just like went on a crazy massacre in Grand Theft Auto 4. That's the thing to do. But I was invested enough in the stories and the characters. They did a good job where I'm like, okay, I kind of like play to fit the world so it fits together nicely. Um, John Marston, though, Red Dead Redemption is so. And then later you killed like 500 cowboy dudes and done all these things. I kind of want to be playing as the fucking super cowboy who goes in there like Clint Eastwood in the old Dollars movies on crack, apparently. Um, where you wouldn't have to make everything make sense. Obviously, your character's going to heal a lot. It doesn't have to be part of the story. It could be. Stuff like Mass Effect pretty much lines up like one to one. Like there's high technology that explains every single gameplay mechanic. Um, like nice. And they fit into a superhero mythology and a very Star Trek like character story, exploring worlds and dealing with political conflict and just the kind of character stories of all of your crew, the bond that you create over the game. Mass Effect is awesome. And yeah, I like character interactivity is another thing to think about. Mass Effect does it well. The Witcher does it really well, where you can make all kinds of choices, and the choices in the Witcher games are the best because they radically change the outcome of these character stories. Whether someone gets a chance at redemption, dies on the spot, becomes a villain, and fucks up a different part of the world, like whatever happens there, you know, your interaction and the I only ever redid one quest because I didn't want Kira Metz to die like that. I was like, come on, man. But Geralt will play it in character as himself, where it's not like a radically different, like completely opposite things that he could say or feel. But there's a number of ways that he could, as Geralt, take on and interact with those things. Like whether they are very morally ambiguous situations where it's like which side you take is very up in the air, and he never loses his sense of personality and who he is as a character, and usually answers in just the coolest way. Like he goes so gangster rapper hard no matter where you are. He also like still has empathy for people, but is just hard as nails as a baseline. But still cares about people and like shares good moments and has a sense of humor. I might put Geralt of Rivia as like number one or two video game character for me. How they pulled all those things off in the world of the game is pitch perfect. That shit's crazy. Yeah. And the integration of the novel series into the world of the games is just CD Project Red coming out of nowhere, like, and I have, you know, a sense to go on tangents all the time. I was gonna say a bunch more Witcher things, but I'm like, yo, this is like the freeform space. Maybe we can have some of this. This isn't great. I don't look as cool as I could. explaining one thing concisely, and then exploring that and playing with what's fun about it, and to create space and a sense of levity, but also to concisely outline everything that I'm talking about, so I don't have to continue talking about it when we're having a fun exploration of the ideas of that game. To have a nice balance of space. So if I'm like, oh, okay, concentrate with me for like 2 seconds, and I'll outline these things and my thoughts about them, well, hopefully, and then we can just kind of talk about the thing, uh, and have it be freeform. And not like you have to use my thoughts, but these are my thoughts, and it'll be concise. If you want to like think about that, and I encourage you to just make your own thoughts about them, and to interject your own things into anything. Where it's not like I watched a thing and it was just this guy saying these things about these things. If I watch a documentary and I'm telling someone about it, it's like there's the guy and the things, there's that outline of the documentary, there's some of the things they explored, and then how they summarized it at the end. But then there's how I felt about those things, because they're sitting here talking to me, and my emotional connection to the content creates something that at least is a little interesting for them, right? Um, and the more you summarize things in your own way and use your own language to explain them, like then maybe they'll watch the documentary, and not only do they have your 2 cents, but now they have their 2 cents and the sense of the documentary, and with all those cents together, you might have a couple bucks. So that's cool, and I'm trying to get that nice, just like have a really good, super general framework that will still break from framework all the time. I know it. I'd have to write a script or something if I wanted to do like, or just really hit it. Sometimes you can just like first take something really well. If you have a good day and you've like thought about everything you want to say enough and cut it down to where you can like, those are all the bullet points. This is what I think about it. Yeah, what might you think about it? These are some things that are interesting, some things that might tie in, something that reminds me of, but not getting too off topic. To have a good free form study session, story section, talking about the worlds of storytelling design. Specifically in comics and games, those fields are interesting to me. Yeah. But then also there's film, and even if you're like designing a world, how you design a world in a book visually, to have visually striking content and to put it into a book is like, what is the, because you're always thinking about things like narrative and emotional resonance in a book, like constantly. So how do those visuals make the characters feel or create atmosphere or something? Like, you describe how they look, but it's how the things look that's reflective to the story. I don't know. What those images evoke, what the images of the place, like what the resonance is there. Look at like Mistborn as a very fun and visually striking fantasy series with like the blood red skies and the ash falling from the skies, and like the white buildings charred by ash, and like the world almost completely dead at nighttime, the swirling mists and the way that the buildings look haunting in the mists, the kind of shacks that the people live in and their quality of life versus this monstrous aristocracy, and even like the cult of absolute power within the world, and the ironclad grip that they keep on people, and the little life that people hammer out, but then Mistborn becoming like a superhero story. Well, now the character has the power to actually fight these things that just existed as like the trappings of horror in her life before, where it's like those guys are completely unstoppable. There's nothing that you can do. You have to witness atrocities and horror like all the time. You keep your head down and you survive. Yeah, you stealth. And then there's the power to actually fight in the world of the story transforms, but how the visuals capture their narrative most perfectly. And then like the heist story in Mistborn is super cool. How they break down like, how are you actually gonna break this unbreakable thing? The idea of the unbreakable vault, and a bunch of characters with different abilities that have to work together. But then I thought the superhero training mythology thing, where the girl's got this crazy high power potential and she's got to start to learn her abilities and take on challenges in a sequence, there we have this big sense of progression. I'm like, what are her feelings about it along the way? Uh, Mistborn is a great series, but it's so visually unique and striking. And just imagining the world of Mistborn, and to hear Sanderson talking about it's pretty cool too, where he was like, what were some moments in his life that captured a sense of wonder while he was looking at visually spectacular things? So it was like the painted glass windows in the cathedrals and just the majesty of that space. But they used them in like an evil way, where the cathedrals is like a place of power, but in a world where only darkness has power. It's like the evil lord is the ominous cathedrals of oppression. But still, there's immaculate design there because all of the entire artisans and the entire talent of this whole world is like controlled by this evil dude. Uh, Whatever. So like, there's a great intelligence and complexity of design, but they've all just been like utilized by the controlling power. Uh, Creating like an entire world. His moments of like the moment of wonder of like driving through the mists at night and that sense of mysterious possibility. You get a feeling when you're driving through mists at night. It's very, very cool. It's enchanting. So that enchanting feeling and the feeling of enchanting majesty with cathedrals and stuff. And then just like how to capture the iconography of this world that got the bad ending of a fantasy novel, where it's like we have to complete the quest so the world doesn't get plunged into an age of terror, right? And Mistborn exists within that world. Like, what does that actually look like? What if a hero's quest failed? So really fun things in setting, really fun things in character, and creating an architecture of story. Sanderson's thing is so good. It's so good, and it's been so actualized, and he gives so many examples of it being good within his own work. Like, it's not like a conceptual exploration into leading story design. It's been proven and proven and proven to work for him. And he is quite open and honest on being like, this is my framework. These things have worked for me. He also throws in, these are things that work for other writers, with the encouragement to find what works for you, find your narrative voice, and then here's a whole bunch of tools you can use to add to that voice, you know? But nothing's like, this is the way it has to be. So it's demonstrations and examples of things where it's like, yes, you can use this ideation process to come up with interesting ideas effectively and to build them onto each other in ways so that they work well together. And there's a cohesion of narrative as you're explaining whatever your magic system is, whatever your elements of technology. There's fantastical things that you add into science fiction and fantasy that create part of that value. There's things that are expected, and then there's ways you can turn that on its head. You're doing something that reflects fantasy and maybe something else, you know? Like the Queen's Gambit, right? The autistic chess genius that changes up the game and is like, falls in love with. You have a magic story that parallels that in some way. And she's got a way different way of looking at and doing magic. You have like a regular magic system, but then you have someone who's innovating on it in a crazy way, and then their explorations through the world. And that'd be like fun, you know, like their brain doesn't work in quite the same way how they see the world. So you're adding a different type of character story into the magic world building of your fantasy story. So it becomes kind of like the fantasy world and the Queen's Gambit thing, and you can do this in an infinite number of ways. And once you create a thing, you shouldn't just be like, well, then I'll look up the reference for the next piece. And that you should, you know, always be willing, and, you know, there's references for everything, but not to get scared to add your own ideas to it. And to just like, if that's the setup and the framework, you can explore that and should practice exploring that in your own way, you know? And I love to do that. Like, if you're just thinking of a setting that's fun, you don't need someone else's idea or like permission to change it in some way. and to explore it. You want the characters to take on a sense of life of their own, and to have the freedom to like do things you haven't even seen before. Yeah. So to let the architecture of the story down, so you can also like explore it yourself. It's good. Um, so yeah, no, things like how you build an awesome game with fun, addictive challenges that cut through all the stress and pain of your life and get you engaged in this thing that hopefully move you from one emotional state to a better one. We can try things, challenge yourself. How you make a thing that's really good at doing that, but then it progresses in all of these ways to create something that you gain this long form mastery of as well. I really like that. And then how you make a cool and engaging world that explores concepts and ideas and characters and creates a window for the audience into this, world, this entertainment world, like an exploration into ideas, how you do that, and they give their imagination to you, use it in all these fantastic ways. Storytelling fusion, totally magical, and where the two worlds meet, like I like both of those elements separately, but we'll talk a little bit about where those things meet, how they meet in a couple of interesting ways, like Mario, Zelda, Final Fantasy, and Metal Gear, great examples. But there's so many more as well, and it's not like I have disrespect for like realistic narrative games. They do a lot of things in really effective ways. They're super successful. Some of them are really, really fun and even emotionally resonant. It's just funny sometimes. They don't even. And I grew up with like people that did acknowledge the narrative of the game as this experience, and the world kind of. And I'm like, it's cool to see that. I'm sure you could do it in some ways. You could make like some things so that they don't seem totally strange together. Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. Peace and love.